Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. This afternoon, today, morning, I don't know. Why did I put a time frame on it? Because I usually don't. One of those days. Hey, we have Matthew Hexter on with us and the founder of Evergood Elixirs. And the reason that is so exciting is because they make skier pee. Not skiers pee, but they make skier pee. Matthew, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Love the story. And, you were a program manager, project manager, and got an itch. And so walk us how, I always love to know what the catalyst was. And with entrepreneurs, there was a problem to solve. What is the problem that you're solving?
Well, the biggest problem is that Matthew likes to get in trouble. And so early on in my elementary school and middle school years, I was the kid that was always getting in trouble because I was just bored. I wanted to, explore and see how far I could push the limits. In high school, that meant a lot of detentions and possible being expelled, so I behaved, right? I wanted to graduate. And then, fast forward when my wife and I got married, I told her that I probably should have a hobby. Otherwise, Matthew tends to get bored and, do dumb stuff and get in trouble. So for our first Christmas together, my wife got me a gift certificate for a coffee roasting class. And I was very intrigued. And this was, even before Starbucks. So I learned how to roast coffee.
Whoa, there was coffee before Starbucks?
I don't know.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not a Starbucks fan.
Sounds like you old guys are making stuff up now.
Yeah, that's not a plug
Absolutely.
for Starbucks, by the way.
That's our job, man. Yep. Yeah, I don't make up false stuff. So started roasting coffee, and then, I had a good decade in that. And then got bored of that. So then for one birthday, my wife got me a Mr. Beer kit. I learned how to make really bad beer.
Was that the one
I would say 50-50.
The little plastic keg?
It is, yeah, that little brown plastic thing. Yeah, you get on Groupon or whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, but I was intrigued. So I ended up taking a chemistry of brewing class at that point, the only college in the U.S. that offered it. I audited it and was hooked. Saw a purpose for chemistry. It's like, oh, wow, okay. Maybe I should have paid attention in high school. So started a brew club, and it's still going strong after 11 years, which I'm super geeked about, back in Ohio. And every month we'd get together and kind of show our wares with each other, do little taste tests. And one time a guy brought over fermented lemonade. I'm like, you can do that? He's like, oh, come on. You can ferment anything, as long as it's got sugar. So apparently I missed that calling in college.
Probably wouldn't have graduated if you'd known that. That was
Exactly.
I feel the same way about that.
Yeah, so that's how Skier Pea was born. Started fermenting that. Didn't have a name for it. And then my snarky teenage son actually named it. So yeah, like you said, Otis, there's always a backstory, right? There's always some sort of inciting event or a number of inciting events.
Well, sorry, Cam, I thought you were going to go, but what I find interesting is I always think of people from Ohio, and I know it's not true, but this is my I guess you could call it racist opinion of the Midwesterners. Y'all are all either on a farm or in a big city. You come out to Colorado, and now you've started a company that is about the outdoors. That's the theme of Evergood Elixirs, right? All the product names, and make sure we hit each one of those. So how did that switch happen?
Well,
or is it not a switch?
No, I don't know. I don't know that it was a switch. I grew up in Suburbia, USA, just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, which I've got a very interesting story about that. We might want to touch on that. Kind of some fun tidbits there. But then went to Ohio State, and then that's where I met my wife, my lovely wife of 30 years. And then we moved up outside of Columbus to Mount Vernon. So there was a lot of outdoors. So started to do a lot of fishing, a lot of hunting. But even prior to that, I would go on ski trips with my parents. We'd go to New York, we'd go to Pennsylvania. And so I just grew up loving skiing. So I actually had an opportunity to teach all of my kids how to ski, which was super cool, but they don't really have ski slopes there. They have like ski hills in Ohio. So it didn't really feel like a far reach when we moved out here. It was just an opportunity to kind of step up our game, learn how to ski the big mountains, learn how to ski powder, actually buy a real mountain bike, not the little cheap Schwinn from Kmart.
with the fake
Right?
knobbies on it and call it a mountain bike.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Matthew, one thing I wanted to get on before we forget as we keep going here is with your type of business, especially more than others, how do you balance the experimentation, the product development side of things with, making sure that you're keeping the lights on? Because yours more so than other industries out there. It's like, I feel like I'd be playing around with that recipe way too much.
Right. Yeah. So it might be really good. Let me back up and just give your listeners and your viewers just the quick elevator pitch, right? So I own a craft winery called Evergood Elixirs, and we make wine from lemons, not grapes. And usually that's kind of a brain explosion, like, oh, you can do that. And so we have 4 different flavors. Our first one is the Skier P, which Otis, you had talked about or introduced early on. So just 4 ingredients: water, lemon, sugar, and yeast. And then we've expanded to more products. We have a strawberry lemonade called Snow Bunny. We have one made with lemons and limes called Switch Stance, which kind of tastes like an instant margarita. And then our most recent one is a Citrus Stomp, which is a grapefruit lemon. So just 5 ingredients: water, lemon, sugar, yeast, and then the grapefruit. And so where you were going was, so you just came out with Citrus Stomp, right?
Right.
Like, how do you make new flavors and not get lost in that? Well, the good news is, a lot of people say it was bad news. The good news is we had a pandemic, and then we had a lockdown. So Matthew got to do a lot of experimenting with flavors. I think I bought about 50 different flavors from everywhere I could find. Just started doing these Google searches, getting in all different flavors, and just, it was cocktail hour at the Hexter family, like every day for months on end, right? Which was super fun because that's where we found Citrus Stomp and our grapefruit, and I really didn't see that coming, honestly. But you're right, we need to keep the lights on, and we can get into this a little bit about our journey from self-distribution to now having a distributor. It's all about liquor to lips. And so we need to get our product into your mouth. And normally we do that at a liquor store, like at a liquor tasting. We would do that at a wine festival. And we're still continuing to try to figure out how to do that, in a kind of a post-COVID world. So I get to be, kind of the nutty professor in the background, coming up with all this stuff. But I do have a number of people that are trying to keep me on the straight and narrow, in terms of sales and focus. Don't get, keep your hobby here, right?
Oh yeah. Do you have so what I gotta ask then is, as I'm thinking about it, because I'm picturing you just ordering crates and crates of all these different fruits and just playing around with all the different stuff. So you don't need to give away the secret of what's coming next for Evergood Elixirs or anything like that. But do you have a favorite fruit or anything that you want to throw in there that's kind of on the list of like, ooh, a mango one might be interesting or anything like that?
Yeah. So I was really hoping to come out with a watermelon. we had experimented with a watermelon flavor, which we thought was going to work for us. And then when we started getting samples in from the supplier, we couldn't land on a consistent flavor or right, consistent batch to batch, if that makes sense.
That
Right.
makes great sense to me because I know that, well, my consistency with picking out watermelon, I always blame it on the picking out, but it ain't that. I think it may be just as well the watermelons are so variety packed that it's hard to create a consistency out of them. I wouldn't
And I
surprise me
think
one bit.
I think the watermelon also kind of falls in that category of things where we have a flavor in our head and then it's almost completely different from what the actual fruit tastes like. You know, grapes kind of have that going on. There's grape flavoring and then there's grapes. Bananas are the big one because they base that flavor off an extinct banana that, you know, died out 100 years ago. That we have these kind of things that are based on what we're picturing, but we can't quite get there from the actual fruit. And so I think, yeah, watermelon definitely falls in that category.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we're super excited. We're coming out with a seasonal called Heartwarmer,
Mm.
and that's our take on Glühwein. And it's
Ooh.
super cool because we've had a lot of people who've been to Germany, who've been to the Christmas markets, and actually, you know, get the mugs where they go around trying all the different Glühwein, tell us that this tastes better than Glühwein,
Wow.
which is super exciting. So it's just our skier pea with cranberry and then cinnamon and cloves.
Mm.
So we're getting ready to release that. We actually just got the illustration completed.
Mm.
We're working on the label, and we should launch it here in November.
Just in time to sponsor the McGregor family gumbo party, right, Dad?
There you go.
Absolutely.
And I have tasted it, and it's pretty darn good. I can
Oh
say
yeah.
that. Well, you know, where your business is at, and this is kind of fun. We've had a lot of entrepreneurs on our show, but you're in that crux of got to make scale. You have demand and you have capital coming in, but that demand is almost outweighing your capital. So I'm curious, when you start thinking about this, how are you handling that scalability of the business?
Yeah. Well, and you're exactly right. You know, how do I make that shift from you know, crawl to walk to run? You know, when we first pitched this idea, um, you know, we didn't know. We didn't know what we didn't know, right? We didn't know if people would open their wallets and actually pay for this. You know, sure, I could sell it to you, Otis, but could I sell it to somebody that doesn't know me at all, right?
Mhm.
And really doesn't care about me or my product. So they're going to buy it on the merit of the product alone. So, you know, when we first started, it was all about, you know, minimal viable product, right? How can I get to market as cheap and as quickly as possible? And so now we're at a point where the demand is increasing. You know, we've gone from self-distributing to about 200 locations to being picked up by a distributor with the possibility of going into 2,000 locations in Colorado alone. And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I move from these 500-liter fermenters, which are actually from Germany, you know, about 100 gallons, about 130-ish gallons, but I go 100 gallons. How do I move to 500 gallons to 1,000 gallons? And then how do I not put a burden on my family and volunteers to actually bottle? Because we're still manually bottling every one of these. You know, so we just purchased a canning line, just got delivered last week. And I was joking that this little piece of equipment costs more than my first house. I'm like,
Probably
oh,
did.
yeah, it did. Yeah. Yeah. Like $95,000 for this canning line. And, you know, I paid 55,000 for my first house. So we joke, right? And then we were crawling and then walking and then running. And that was good. That was good.
But so as you're, kind of going through that.
Hey, we're back. Wow, technical difficulties can happen to anyone. And first time, I think, in the Cam and Otis show, but that's cool. So adjust fire and regroup. And now we are moving ahead again with scaling Evergood elixirs from 100 gallons to 500 gallons. I'm pulling for the 1,000-gallon because I'm all about 10Xing. I'm about 10Xing my lemon wine, my skier pea. That's what I'm about. So Matthew, how are you making that leap to grow, to scale from I would say, because I do have to admit I have some innate knowledge of Evergood elixirs, scaling from the garage operation to full-blown business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? Right. So when we first launched, it was all about minimal viable product. How do we get to the market as quick as possible, as easy as possible, right? The good thing about making wine and alcohol is it's just one big chemistry experiment. And as long as you weren't sleeping during chemistry class in high school, I guess I was. But, there's lots of YouTube videos. You can pretty much figure it out. And so, when we first started, I had to move from a 6-gallon carboy. It's kind of the big glass fermenters, typically used, for beer or wine. You can also use a bucket. So I had to convert from 6 gallons to 100 gallons, which is what we're making now. Our next leap is I've just purchased a 330-gallon blending tank, which I have to move with my forklift. It's just way too heavy. So now I'm kind of, blending multiple fermenters together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I want to move up to a larger fermenter. The conical fermenters are very pricey, very pricey. So you were talking about 10X. I can get a fermenter for $440. To move up to about 500 gallons, I've got to 10X that at least, right? And it becomes a lot less mobile. Right now I've got everything on platform trucks, and it's easy to push around over here, to the canning line, or here to the bottling line. Once I move there, then everything just becomes more of a permanent fixture, if that makes sense. I've got 3,000 square foot facility, and right now I can just move everything where I want it, when I want it, how I want it. Scaling like that's going to be a lot more difficult. And additionally as well, we talked about, we're in about 200 stores, and then we've just got picked up by a distributor. So now we have the potential of being in 2,000 stores. So now I also have to worry about, okay, I need multiple pallets of bottles now. I need multiple pallets of raw inventory, raw materials. And we just purchased a canning line, right? That cost more than my first house, almost double, right? And the thing's really small. I wish it was huge, but it's not, so they kind of get you in that. But it'll allow us to scale there. Yeah, all of that's a challenge, to learn how to crawl, then walk, then run. I kind of still feel like we're in crawl stage.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing too, because your recipes don't, going back to chemistry, it doesn't necessarily scale. If I want to go from 100 gallons or 10 gallons to 100 gallons, doesn't mean I multiply everything in that recipe by 10. That's the other thing that I think people, you haven't spent any time in the kitchen cooking. You can't make up 10 cakes worth of cake batter and then pour it into 10 pans. It just don't work that way.
Right.
Double the temperature to half the time type thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with yeast, I learned that early on. You don't 10X your yeast. Yeah, but you really don't. So that was very interesting for me to see how little yeast I actually need, because I don't want to ferment too quickly.
Mm.
I want to make sure it's almost like when you're roasting coffee, they have something called roast curves. And
Mm-hmm.
so you don't want to like go from, like 0 degrees to like 450 degrees, like instantly. It's going to do funky things to the coffee beans, very similar to alcohol. I want to be able to control how quickly the yeast is consuming the fermentable sugars, because that will affect my overall flavor.
So one interesting thing that we were talking about on the scaling side of things, I think, represents a really nice issue that a lot of people deal with, is the decision when we're talking about scaling of basically whole new systems, whole new big appliances and all that kind of stuff, or replicating the small appliances over and over. You're talking 100 gallons trying to get to 1,000. Okay, well, can we run 10 of these 100 gallons, or can we run it twice as fast, or those type of things, to where you have to look at all of these different questions rather than just the simple, oh, well, build a big warehouse and get the giant machines, because that's not really how it works when you're trying to scale naturally like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep, for sure.
Well, how
And
do you
so
balance? Oh, I'm sorry, Cam. Go ahead.
no, were you gonna ask how he balances that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, there we go. Okay, well, we can both ask it. How do you balance that then? How do you balance that process of buying the new shiny machine versus just putting in more man hours at the old stuff or whatever it is?
Yeah, yeah. I like to be forced into those decisions, right? And what forces me is sales. I want my end consumer to be forcing my hand on all of that, because otherwise, then I'm spending money I don't have, right? It's almost like credit cards, right? I want to buy it now with the hope that in the future I can actually pay off the card. And so as demand increases, that kind of forces our hand. I do know what my capacity is. Like right now, I know that I can produce 400 cases of product a month, and that's it. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're always looking at sales reports and market trends. We've had some great months with our distributor. We're not quite there at 400 cases, so I don't feel like it's forcing my hand. And then I'm going to look at what I talked about earlier. Do I just buy more 500-liter fermenters and more platform trucks, and we continue to do the small batch, because it really is a small batch, handcrafted product right now, and I don't know that I want to give that up too quickly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think just like you were alluding to earlier, Dad, that the recipe kind of gets involved with that. That's something brings to mind a lot of my agricultural stuff, to where it's like when you're talking about growing something in a small room, especially when you talk about controlled environment agriculture, it's something to where replicating it, the secret sauce to replicating it is figuring out what kind of scales you're keeping things with. If you got 100 plants and you can't just jump that into a giant room, but if you can replicate the room over and over and those type of things and things like that, to where it's really looking at what are you adding on, just like you're saying of adding in the more of the 500 gallon. Ooh, and I missed my terminology. 500 gallon was not the mixers. Yeah, whatever. But
Yeah.
finding that point to where what variable needs to be changing, and then keeping the other variables set inside of that area and moving forward, so that you're not going to wind up with some weird recipe because you're using 1,000 gallon rather than 100 gallon.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and I usually will make like small mini batches. Like I'll start with 1 gallon.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll try to replicate to 5 gallons and see how that works. And then as long as that's replicating correctly, then I might try, because I have 200-liter fermenters as well. And so then I can replicate, okay, what does 20, 40, 60 gallons look like, and is it properly translating?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Well, I want to shift, because there's some threads through here that are commonalities to business that we've kind of touched on passed in, but I think there's a real key element right here. And when you mentioned the small batch, small handcrafted batch, what jumped up to me was core values of Evergood Elixirs.
Mm.
And what's an interesting feature is, how do you scale a business that is, our core value is small handcrafted batches? What do you do? I mean, you've got, what'd you say? Let's say you've got a demand right now of 375 cases a month, right? So you're very near whatever the math would be on that. Camden, do the work on that right now. 375 cases out of 400 cases a month. So that's pretty near capacity. And you can do some other things to increase capacity. So how do you handle that decision-making process as the CEO of Evergood Elixirs?
Right. Yeah, good question. Our goal is to be not just a national brand, but an international brand. So at some point, I'm going to have to continue to increase our ability to produce. So at some point, I'm going to have to invest in, one of those massive fermenting tanks, that you see, at Coors. You see a Dogfish Head. Choose kind of your favorite brewery, right? And you see these massive tanks that literally cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, again, getting back to my earlier observation, I'm going to wait for the market demand to force me into that. One thing that I've done is I've done a really good job of documenting our processes. We have an operational playbook that we're always updating and revisiting on a monthly basis, just to make sure that everything we're doing, we're documenting. Mm-hmm. And from that, we can build upon it. I remember someone once saying complex systems work because at one time they were a simple system that worked. So I'm trying to make sure my simple system works so that when things get super complex, it still works. And, like you said, Cam, then at that point, it's just a matter of scaling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I like that. I like the way you're putting that there, thinking about it as a simple system becoming complicated, because what that makes my mind jump to immediately, and we don't bring it up near as much as we used to, I think, Dad, but rugby, of course, because everything comes back to rugby. And it's one of those things where I think rugby can be the simplest game. It's so simple until you start to make it complicated. And I think it's such a funny thing, because you see it at, all sorts of different levels, to where we can put a ball in your hand and you're going to have a decent first game just by saying, hey, pass the ball backwards, get in line with someone next to you, hit the person if they have the ball, that type of thing. It's a pretty simple concept there that can get really complicated, but it's all built on those simple concepts throughout the game. And I think that's what makes it easier to replicate, to your point.
Yeah, well, good point.
There's some other business things, generalities I want to extract out of that. And one of them is, in order to be successful at scalability, you have to have systems and processes in place. And I love the old school. I was going to say simplicity, but then we're saying the same word over and over and over again. But the old school way of, hey, we just wrote down how we did it. And when you write things down, guess what? You can go back and go, well, how did we do that yesterday? Oh, okay, ding, 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 ding. And you know what? If you did it again that way tomorrow, guess what? That's a system. Mm-hmm. You're creating a system. And when we have a system, we can optimize that system. We can improve on that system. And we can scale that system, because we can look at various points in the process that we can dive into and say, well, what if that vat, the fermenting vat, was 100 gallons instead of 10 gallons or whatever at various points, and then do the math and test the system, test the scalability of the system. But the other thing, and this is the thing I always love to work with my clients on, is at what point does your system, whether it's an HR, payroll, or winemaking system, hit max capacity, and what do you do next? And that's where I think I think what I'm hearing every good elixirs is you've got a system and you're just about at max capacity of that system, you know? So how do you jump to that? And I'm going to throw that out there because I know some of the answers. I'm going to quit talking so you can talk. So, but how do you jump to that next system, create that next system?
I got to get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I get out of the way is I make sure that the playbook's documented, and then I empower others to do what I've been doing. So kind of getting back to Michael Gerber's point on E-Myth Revisited, I'm working on my business, not in my business. So one thing I've done recently, I brought on an associate vintner who is now making all of our wine. And I've taught him how to do everything I've been doing. And it went from me showing him, or me doing it, to me showing him, to me walking beside him, to then me stepping back. And now I don't even really need to be there, because he's learned it all. He's followed the playbook. He actually helped me do version 2.0 on the playbook, just because there were some things I was still doing in my head that I needed to get out on paper. So I think that's one of the big challenges for an entrepreneur. It's easy to be a solopreneur, right? But what if you want to scale and you want to replicate yourself? Then you have to bring others along. And at some point you have to just kind of open your hands and say, here you go. Don't kill my baby. Right. So yeah, better to do that now, right? Better to do that now than, for us to get picked up nationally, after we're in Cannes, and then for me to basically have a heart attack because I'm working 180 hours a week.
I think something that we're kind of touching on, I think when a lot of folks think about scaling and scalability and those type of things, they picture it as a pretty black and white problem. And I think there's a lot more art to it than what people think. And I would say, scaling takes creativity is the way I would put it. And one of the things, and Dad, I'm not sure if we talked about this on the show, if you and I just had a side conversation, because believe it or not, we never switch this off. This is just how it goes. This is welcome to the McGregor dinner table. But in order to foster innovation and creativity, you have to be able to empower your employees, like what you're saying. And I think that what that takes is having that simple system and then turning it over to them to allow them to turn it into something bigger. Because when you're really talking about scaling a system up, you need that creativity. That's not just okay, well, multiply everything times 10 and we're all set. There's so much more creativity that needs to be happening on that. And you can't have that when somebody's breathing down your neck. The Netflix CEO, I listened to an interview with him the other day, and he was talking about how you don't want a classical orchestra, you want a jazz band, where each person, just like you were just describing, Matthew, each person knows what they're doing, they know their area, they've been walked through it, they've gotten up to that point, and then they said, okay, bye, do whatever you want. I know you know how to play the saxophone. I'm going to let you play the saxophone. I got you to this point. Now it's all yours. And I think that's what you're doing there. And I think that's one of those things that, as much as that's almost a buzzword of innovation, you need it for this kind of scalability that we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and it's also important to remember that it never stops. We always want to think we've landed the plane, right? We only have to land it once. It's almost like you touch down and then you lift back up. Something you were talking about, Cam, reminded me of something. I just pulled this up. The CEO of Rakuten. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I believe it's like the Amazon of the Asian Amazon. Mm-hmm. Talks about the rule of 3 and 10. And he says everything breaks in multiples of 3 and powers of 10. So what he means is that everything needs to change, like how you handle payroll, how you schedule meetings, what type of comms you use, what ERP system you use, what CRM system you use. So when you're talking about scaling, I've got to change everything now. Right. I've just brought on new workers. I'm bringing more people into my tribe, right? Even our comms have changed. Like we've gone from email to now we use Basecamp to track everything, right? Yeah. So, I mean, you just have to kind of be okay with change and realize that change is your new normal, right? The world is now changing every day, and that's okay, right? You haven't missed the boat. Welcome to running an organization that you want to grow, that you want to scale,
Right.
right?
I think that's an interesting thing because it's reminding me of another interview I heard. But when you're talking, ooh, and I lost that. Are you kidding me? This break today, it's jacking me all up. Oh my gosh.
Technical difficulties, not just in the electronics, but in
Yeah.
the human mind. It's called a distraction.
Yes, sir. Well, shoot, Dad, you got something? Because I completely lost that one. I'll be completely honest, guys.
Well, no, it's just the amazing thing of seeing success, but how success can also be a cliff to failure. And I know that with Evergood, you walked that line really close a few times. And how do you looking back on it, what's the lesson learned that you can throw at entrepreneurs so when they reach that point, that it's not as, oh my God, it's all about to just crash and burn.
Yeah. Well, and I had mentioned this earlier, and I don't know if we captured this or not, but a guy named Tim Ferriss he did a TED talk on something called fear setting, and I found it very, very helpful early on, because what he recommends you do is brainstorm what are all the worst outcomes, worst possible outcomes, right? Like how bad could this really, really get, right? And then what can you do now to mitigate it, right? What can you do now to mitigate the outcome? And is that really a deal breaker, right? So let's back up and let's talk about what actually launched Evergood Elixirs. So I had this crazy idea, for years. In 2017, I started kind of doing a proof of concept prototype. I'm out there, I'm pitching it, right? I'm pitching it. I start to do some LinkedIn stalking, where I start to think, okay, who would I like to work with? And I'm going to get a free premium membership and then start stalking all these people. And lo and behold, I get an opportunity to pitch to a multi-billion-dollar organization.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, they bring me in. Like the senior strategic sourcing buyer brings me in, and I pitch Evergood Elixirs, and they say, we love it. We want to order 1,000 cases. Like you realize 1,000 cases, you don't mean 1,000 bottles. You mean 1,000 cases. That's 12,000 bottles. Yeah. We'll start at this one location. And then from there, we'll see how it goes. And then we'll take it international. Whoa, holy smokes, really? Like pinch myself, right? And so I came back, and that's what launched Evergood Elixirs. Like that weekend, this sales opportunity happened on a Friday. On Saturday, I'm registering the LLC. I'm trying to figure out what I don't even know. Like how do you sell alcohol? I don't know. So I have to learn all of this. Well, a couple months into it, I decided to do some fear setting and say, okay, if this company doesn't fulfill their obligation, because at this point it was verbal, because I don't own a legal winery, right? Contractually, they can't write anything. I'm just an idea. If they don't order, would I still do this? What's the downside, right? Well, I'm glad I did that, because they ended up not ordering, not due to me, but because they decided to outsource all of their liquor sales and liquor management to a third party. And that third party started to reduce, not increase, the SKUs. So they were dropping people left and right because they wanted to, they wanted to, have a system, a common system, right? They wanted to standardize. So yeah, the whole idea of being okay with loss,
Mm-hmm.
and can I work through that? Can I step through that? Right? I decided that early on. Yep, I'll be okay. We'll be okay.
I love that concept of fear setting. I think it's something, it touches on a lot of different areas that we've been going through. But I think as an entrepreneur, and really in anything, you have to recognize the actual impacts of threats and what that really means, rather than going off of your fears, because we kind of have this natural thing we do where we amplify fear because it just feeds on itself and it just keeps feeding and feeding and feeding. Whereas things may not be near as bad as you think they are, or they may come out better. And I think it's interesting because you have to be able to look at all those different possibilities, but then not be able to dread them right now, because the more you're dreading those various possibilities, the more that you're going to stress out and you're not going to perform at a high level. I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying earlier, Matthew, about the constant change. There's so much change going on that you can't really sit here and stress all those different things. You have to be able to focus on what you have control over, which actually brings me back. I thought of the reference I was going to make earlier. It was a conversation about Kodak and how Kodak failed because they didn't get into digital imaging, right? Well, no, think about it now. We're in 2020. Fast forward a little bit more. Kodak was never going to become Instagram. They were never going to hit that point where they were actually what we're using now. There's no possible way that they could have anticipated that. But they did what they did in the time. You still have to move forward like that. With all these constant changes, you can't predict the future. It's the simplest way to put it. And if you stress about being able to sit there and predict the future, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think that's an important takeaway.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, Cam, you're going to get paralyzed, right? If you live in that world, that fear vacuum, yeah, man, that just gums you up.
Mm-hmm.
That totally gums you up, right? But from day one, my whole thought with Evergood is, man, I'm just holding it with open hands, right? If I realize it's bigger than me, and I'm just going to hold it with open hands, I'm going to control just what I can control. And most of the things I can't control, I'm not going to stress out about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm going to try to always move the ball forward. I'm sure it's no different from, rugby. You just you let it flow, right? And you flow the game. I played hockey at a pretty elite level. Right. And yeah, we learned that we practiced all the fundamentals, right? Our passing, our stick handling, right? Our placement on the ice, right? Our positioning, right? But once you get into the game, man, you got to flow it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get in a flow, it's like, oh my gosh, that's where the magic happens.
Oh yeah, no, I'm my mind's going right to, we're just wrapping up on the playoffs now. Finally with hockey, it got there eventually. But it thinks about like one of the ugliest things you can watch in hockey, and I didn't play any, but older brother did, and I'm a big Avalanche fan. Is when they start forcing it on the power play. You got this team like that. We'll use the Avalanche as the easy example, and they are so stacked on that top line. But when they're forcing it, it's ugly to watch. It's painful to watch. Like you can tell that they're not going with the flow anymore. And that's what breaks it up. And you wind up not performing, to your point.
Yep.
Well, flow is that powerful place that you always want your team to be at. And man, I could spend another hour talking about flow and how do you get flow and how you sustain it. And yeah, there's a lot going on there. Matter of fact, I'll toss out a book that actually talks about flow. It's called Stealing Fire. Great book, really interesting. I can't think of the author's name now, but really interesting case study about what flow is, how do you create flow. Both he did a study on SEAL Team 6 how they create flow and how they define flow, but how you move that into your business team. So it's a great, really great book if you haven't checked that one out. So I'll throw that out there.
I was gonna throw out, because in Grit, Angela Duckworth talks about it as the flow. Flow is where your skill level equals the competition.
Mm-hmm.
It's that point where you're right at it. You're not so much more skillful that you're not performing because it's too easy or anything like that. It's right where they equal each other, and that's where you get that flow as an athlete.
Well, hey, Matthew, man, it's been great having you on the show. Appreciate the patience on the technical difficulties today. You get the prize button for the first guest to deal with a technical mishap, but that's awesome. So we are creating flow as we are learning, and there is always flow on the Cam and Otis show. Listen to that dad rhyme right there, huh?
Mm-hmm.
How you like that? Matthew, I know you appreciate that one. Use that with the kids when you get done. Okay. But I want to shift to what you learned. And in the interest of flow, I'm going to let Camden go first today.
Okay, so I was gonna say what I learned. Sorry, I'm laughing too much because I'm just anticipating the back and forth that comes of, well, I'm the dad, so I get to go first this week, as if you don't do that every week, and then you throw it to me and you throw me off my game again.
That's right. Are you missing out on the flow?
I'm missing out on the flow. I wasn't there. But what I loved, Matthew, that you were talking about was about letting the market force your hand for growth. It's something I think it's almost becomes a buzzword of having demand-driven business models. And I think you're like the definition of it, because every single question we asked you went back to being demand-driven, and you didn't even use the buzzwords of demand-driven the entire time. It was perfect. But I think when you talk about scaling, having the market force your hand to what's like, okay, now I need to make the step forward. Now I need to make that leap. I think that's the best way you should be looking at it by far.
Yeah, thanks.
That's
Dad,
awesome.
what'd you learn today? Oh, see, I messed up your flow. You're going to send it to Matthew, huh?
Well, I was, but since you called it, I let you go first. I'll let you feel like you're in charge for a little bit today, Camden, and just So what I learned, I love the definition of the complex systems work, because at one time it was a simple system. It makes me think of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Mm-hmm.
How do complex systems become complex? There are a series or a conglomeration of simple systems put together. So when you look at something, you say, man, that's really complex. Is it? I mean, you break it down a little bit, and then if you break it down, you can understand it even better. And then you can really take hold of it. And then you can find those areas where you can tweak it and improve it, make it better and more efficient and more effective. So,
oh yeah.
Matthew, how about you? What'd you learn?
Well, I learned a couple things. Number one, Boise internet is not that good.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Number two, I probably should have shaved.
Well, I've got my hunt camp beard started already. That's what I'm
going. I'm doing the outdoor adventure thing here.
Yeah.
Y'all are making me feel bad. This is 8 days.
Well, what I learned, I wouldn't say I learned, but I was reminded of was, Cam, when you were talking about rugby, and how somebody in their first game can have, good to moderate success, because they're focusing on, the important 3 or 5 or 7 principles,
mm-hmm.
right? Not necessarily the play, right? But focus on these principles. My boys, I played basketball at an elite level, and what I found is when they're not playing well, it's because they're trying to execute a certain play a certain way, and they're expecting the other team to respond a certain way,
mm-hmm.
right? But if they work more on principles, right? Okay, after you do this ball screen, flow over here. Right. Or, just keep everybody out of the paint and keep them 10 feet away. Right. I mean, just, kind of some basics like that. So what I'm trying to do is figure out, okay, how can I flow that into, my game of
mm-hmm.
Evergood Elixirs, and just keep things simple, and be able to, now that I'm delegating, right, because I want to scale, how can I make sure that I give my teammates principles, versus principles they can follow in their own way, right? The way that they do it, which is okay, maybe different than me, right? But how can they flow it their way, right, and not feel like they're failing? But I'm sure I'll be surprised, like, oh wow, I didn't see that coming. That was pretty freaking cool, right? Because Cam did it this way. Wow, that's awesome. So I appreciate that. That was really helpful.
I think that the simplicity you're talking about there, it brought me back to, I think might have been my first day, but definitely first week or so down here at U of A for rugby. And I called you down. I was so nervous for it. You said, hey, just play Grizzlies rugby. Now, I'm playing a completely different style. If you think about it logically, there was no Grizzlies rugby happening out there. But what that meant to me was just go hit people, go hit the ruck over and over. Just do the simple things that I know how to do and quit focusing on the fancy stuff. Just do the simple thing. And that's how you perform at a high level. And you hit it right on the head, Matthew. I think that goes into business as well.
Do the simple things well and the complex things fall into place. I mean, it's just that easy, isn't it?
Yes, sir. There's some Otis poetry for you.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, Matthew, what's the easiest way to find out more about Evergood elixirs, where they can pick some up? Only in Colorado currently, but how do they find out? No.
So you go to skierp.com and that'll tell you all about us.
Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because it looked like you froze a little bit. Telling everybody, go to skierp.com. Or you can just Google skierp. It's not a lot of people using that name. We've got something called a P Finder, and just type in your zip code, and it'll show you where to find the P.
Awesome.
Oh man, there's so many great dad jokes with that name. That's just and I would say middle school boy jokes too, probably.
Well, it was my middle school teenage son that named it.
There you go. That's proof in the pudding, ain't it? Awesome. Well, Matthew, thanks a bunch for taking the time and your patience with my Idahoan temporary studio technological difficulties today. But we do appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and hopefully you can get caught up on continuing to make some more Skier P for us.
Absolutely.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all again for listening to today's show. Special thanks to Matthew Hexter for joining us today, and our sponsors, MASH, Military and Athletic Strength Hemp Oil, and Verbi Virtual Events. You can check out recent episodes of The Cam and Otis Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and check out a full archive at thecamandotusshow.buzzsprout.com. The Cam and Otis Show is on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next week.